Thank you. Well, good day to everybody, whatever hour it is in your time zone. It's too bad we can't meet in lovely Budapest, but we have to be satisfied with Zoom. Thank you for the honor of being a speaker at your important conference. First, a disclaimer. I'm not a physician, a gerontologist, or a real expert on aging, except for my own experiences and studies. For a time, I was a delegate to the United Nations with the AARP organization. I will talk a little bit more about these experiences and also give you a summary. Hang on a second here, I'm sorry. Apologize for the delay. A summary of some of the remarkable advances in medical science during my lifetime. I will conclude with some opinions on lifestyle and then the urgent need to try to reverse the recent declines in life expectancy. I hope that my contribution will be of some benefit to this distinguished audience. On the personal side, I am 87 years young. I say young because I don't feel or maybe even look completely ancient. And I think I still have most of my marbles. My long-term memory still amazes me, remembering events when I was 4 years old. On the other hand, I do tend to forget people's names or something I may have heard 5 minutes ago. My life expectancy is now forecast to be 92, but I'd like to reach at least 95, in good health, that is. It is believed by many experts that the natural maximum hour human life span is 120 to 125 years. Some exciting developments in medical science may help people to reach this level. They take good care of themselves, and if some of their genes can be altered. The work of medical scientists is now aided by artificial intelligence, big data, and cellular reprogramming, as well as an increasing understanding of the zillions of molecules that keep our bodies functioning. Cellular or epigenetic reprogramming may one day be able to reverse some symptoms and illnesses which come with aging, inshallah. Since my birth, life expectancy has grown by a truly remarkable 25 years. The expected length of my life so far has increased by over a third. When I was born, my grandfathers had already died at the ages of 58 and 62, respectively, around the average. I, on the other hand, have been blessed with 6 grandchildren who are now grown up. Tragically, I did lose my only son when he was just 51. Maybe he inherited my factor V Leiden clotting disorder, we'll never know. Part of my luck is genetic. My father lived to the age of 93 and his mother to 94. His uncle died just short of 105 and was still active at over 100. That uncle's daughter, my father's first cousin, will be at 100 next January. My mother lived only to 80, but her first cousin died last year at the age of 103. We cannot select our genes yet. A time will come when at least some of our inherited negative genes can be eliminated. I attribute my current state of health to medical science and the excellent doctors who are prescribing 15 different medicines to keep me alive and reasonably well. I'm fortunate to have a local clinic in our village and a first-class hospital 25 minutes drive away. I have regular appointments with a cardiologist, dentist, dermatologist, gastroenterologist, hematologist, neurologist, nephrologist, ophthalmologist, pulmonologist, urologist, plus a concierge doctor who coordinates all my medical needs. It's a lot of doctors. I feel so fortunate to have this excellent support, plus Medicare, which pays for it all. I also need to pay tribute to my wife, who takes wonderful care of me and saved my life, but more of that later. I'd like to mention sleep, as we know how important adequate sleep is for health. Many older people have trouble going to sleep and use sleep aids. The only aid I use is self-hypnosis, which I learned on an ocean liner crossing the Atlantic. I count slowly backwards from 100, and if it doesn't work the first time, it usually does the second time. I also learned to have siestas when I lived in South America. I have the luxury of having a 1-hour siesta every morning and another one in the afternoon. At night, I usually sleep to 6 or 7 hours. I've been encouraged by reading about neuroplasticity. It has been found that people who stay active physically, socially, mentally, and cognitively have increased connectivity among special neural networks. They can develop new neurons and synapses in the selected brain areas, even in older age. Now let's talk a little bit about advances in medical technology, which are helping us to stay alive. Medical science. How has this incredible increase in life expectancy occurred? It's been a combination of extraordinary discoveries in medical science, improved hygiene, including hand washing, a safer lifestyle, plus modern healthcare systems, and also exponential growth in communications. Possibly the first modern breakthrough was back in 1796, when Edward Jenner developed a vaccine for smallpox. In the mid-19th century, Louis Pasteur further developed the principles of vaccination, as well as the fermentation and pasteurization process named after him, which can kill microbes and thus prevent spoilage. Modern medicine, as we know it and take for granted, is a little more than 100 years old. An early pioneer at the beginning of the last century was Paul Ehrlich. He was one of the first to take a chemical approach to immunology. He was one of the founders of hematology. His first magic bullet was aimed at syphilis, a major sexually transmitted infection, which could be cured by the Ehrlich-developed drug salvarsan. I believe that an uncle of mine contracted syphilis and was saved through salvarsan. Another dramatic breakthrough was insulin for diabetes in 1922, which is still widely used today. Insulin was discovered by 3 scientists in Toronto. In 1928, penicillin was accidentally discovered by Sir Alexander Fleming, although it didn't become widely available until the 1940s. When I contracted and was hospitalized with chickenpox in 1942, my parents actually had to sign a release for me to be administered penicillin, not yet approved for children. During the war, the first company to mass produce penicillin was Pfizer, the company where I worked for several years. When I was growing up in England, there was a major outbreak of poliomyelitis, which paralyzed large numbers of victims. The common treatment was to help sufferers through an iron lung in a hospital setting. Polio was highly infectious, and only in 1955 did Jonas Salk develop his injectable vaccine to prevent people from contracting it. His discovery was followed by Albert Sabin's oral version. Other geniuses who made major contributions to medical science included James Watson and Francis Crick, who proposed the double helix structure of DNA, which gave rise to modern molecular medicine. Drug and vaccine discovery is normally a slow process, requiring extensive experimentation and testing, followed by regulatory approval. There's been progress made on drugs to treat severe conditions like various cancers, pulmonary diseases, heart disease, and stroke. Alzheimer is now an important research target. The recent rapid development of life-saving RNA vaccines has shown that in an emergency like with COVID, the process can be speeded up. Cancer, a long major scourge of mankind, is no longer a guaranteed life sentence, thanks in part to early, accurate detection techniques and new targeted cell therapies. Nanotechnologies like gene therapy are now used to deliver drugs to targeted cells. The increasing use of AI and high-speed computer networks will further accelerate drug development approval. They may also reduce the number of animals sacrificed in research to develop drugs for humans. Now let me talk a little bit about some major influences during my professional career in healthcare. Janssen Pharmaceutical. One of the most prolific medical researchers was Dr. Paul Janssen, 1926 to 2003. I had the privilege and good fortune to report directly to Dr. Paul when I worked for Johnson & Johnson, which had acquired the Janssen Pharmaceutical Company. While only one drug formulation out of 10,000 actually reached the marketplace, Paul's 57th experimental drug in 1958 became haloperidol, the first breakthrough medication for schizophrenia. In 1959, his laboratory discovered the now infamous fentanyl. It started out as the first anesthetic drug used for operations. Previously, patients were being prepped for surgery and they were given ether. I recall having a minor operation at the age of 12 when the anesthesiologist approached me with a bag of ether to put me out. I was so scared that my immediate reaction was to actually punch him in the nose. I did. I punched him in the nose. Some anesthesiologists and surgeons eventually discovered that they could get high on fentanyl, and that's when addiction sadly began. When fentanyl was put in patch form to help reduce local pain, it soon became an addictive drug of choice. Dr. Paul would be turning in his grave to know this. Much research lies ahead to replace opioids for the relief of pain. Incidentally, it has been found that virtual reality can help patients reduce their perception of pain. Other notable Janssen discoveries were Imodium for diarrhea and Nizoral for fungal disease. As well as being a remarkable scientist, Paul was an astute businessman. When he sold his company to J&J, he became the second biggest shareholder of the company. He lived life to the full, said he had never had a sick day in his life, but he died aged 77. Maybe it was genetics. Now a few words about the company which acquired this genius and its history in the field of medical devices. Medical devices of different types have been around for centuries, if not longer. But of course, they were primitive by today's standards. A key date for modern medicine was 1867, when Joseph Lister published his Antiseptic Principles of the Practice of Surgery, which focused on the role of sepsis. A few years later, during the Boer War in South Africa, it was recognized that soldiers were dying mainly from infections from their wounds. Johnson & Johnson, which was founded in 1886 as a textile manufacturer of gauze, was the first company to sterilize gauze bandages in response to the war's findings. This was the beginning of J&J's eventual development into the world's largest healthcare company. While I worked for that company, one of my responsibilities was as VP International for the recently acquired Extracorporeal Medical Specialties Company. This subsidiary specialized in hemodialysis machines and blood filters, which kept patients with kidney failure alive. As I saw suffering patients around the world spending hours having their blood filtered, I said to myself that this was something which I would never want done to me. Well, I came close. Some 20 years ago, I had a grapefruit-sized adenoma on my kidney, which had to be quickly excised. I lived for about 16 years with one kidney, which gradually had a reduction in capacity. I needed a transplanted second kidney. However, with a waiting list of 3 years and the likelihood that somebody of my age would be ineligible, I was faced with the dreaded dialysis. Out of the blue, my wife offered me one of her kidneys. Well, I have a rare blood type, hers is universal O, so she was able to be my donor. This was 3 years ago. By the way, Medicare and our supplemental insurance covered the full cost of our transplant, which was about $300,000. We didn't even see an invoice. In many countries, drivers who died in motor accidents, often motorcyclists, are the most frequent donors. In some countries, drivers have to show an opt-out on their driver's licenses if they do not wish to have become donors. But this is still not the case in the US. The first successful human heart transplant was by the South African Dr. Christian Barnard in 1980. While much progress has been made, only some 3,500 heart transplants around the world each year are successful. Recently, the first heart transplant from a pig to a human was achieved, but the patient only lived for a few days. Medical science will surely progress so that more and more organ and other xenotransplants will be possible. One extraordinary recent development is the new skin for skin grafts, whereby human skin can be grown in the laboratory from stem cells. Recently, a human ear was printed from stem cells and grafted onto a young person's face. Other bionic body parts will surely follow. Another interesting development has been that of a biocompatible surgical superglue to seal human skin. Some exciting new scientific developments include work being done on the regeneration of human organs, which may eventually reduce the need for transplants. Medical devices like drugs are also a fairly recent development. We can view ancient drawings of operations which look pretty horrendous. In modern times, the first cardio defibrillator was demonstrated in 1899. The first hip replacements were implanted in 1962 by Dr. John Tarnley in Liverpool. Their successes are helping older people become mobile again. 10% of people over 60 have osteoarthritis and can have their hips, shoulders, and knees replaced. Thanks to development by military medical researchers, there are now whole limb bionic prostheses with brain-computer interface and can function almost as well as natural limbs. Now to medical diagnostics. There have been some tremendous advances in recent years. We now take diagnostic imaging like MRIs, ultrasound, heart monitors for granted. The field remains dynamic, aided by AI, including new diagnostic tests for viruses and genetic screening to determine which treatments might be the best for a given patient. An exciting device in development for diabetes is the Apple Watch, which will be able to measure blood glucose levels without the need to draw blood. In the area of ophthalmologists, there are now contact lenses which have been developed to detect and monitor blood glucose level in tears. Recently, there have been articles in the lay press about the developments in the analysis of stools and wastewater for disease-causing bacteria. I recently visited my dermatologist for a regular checkup. She was using some new technology. As she scanned my moles with a microscope, her assistant was able to look at those same moles on her computer. They were being automatically measured, and she called out those measurements to the dermatologist. Now let's move on to the dental field and some positive developments. Considerable progress has been made in dental care. I was brought up in England, which used to have a reputation for poorly cared for teeth. This was partly a dietary issue as well as neglect. My parents, who were very well groomed in other ways, lost most of their teeth. I recall visiting when they were older and seeing their false teeth sitting in glasses on the bathroom shelf. There is more awareness of dental health now. High-impact ceramics developed through the space program can now fill, restore, and strengthen teeth. People are used to visiting a dentist regularly, having their teeth cleaned and maybe whitened. They are also used to regularly flossing and brushing their teeth. Moving on to the brain, the earliest recorded history of neuroscience dates back to the early Egyptians, who would drill a hole in the skull to attempt to treat brain or mental disorders. The ancient Greeks and then the Romans dissected brains to confirm that the brain ruled and was the center of intelligence. In the Middle Ages, Islamic medicine focused on how the brain and the body interacted. In Persia, Ibn Sina, considered by some as the father of modern medicine, wrote a medical encyclopedia explaining phenomena like dementia, epilepsy, stroke, paralysis, mania, and hallucinations. In Middle Ages Europe, the first anatomy textbook included descriptions of the brain. Leonardo da Vinci made sketches of the human skull. Later, René Descartes, he studied the physiology of the brain. In the 19th century, the specific functions of the brain were discovered, including the role of electricity in nerves and the connection between the frontal cortex and executive functions. Major advances in brain science and treatment in the 20th century included Dr. Alois Alzheimer, who first described a disease named after him in 1906. The electron microscope was developed in 1931, allowing scientists to study the brain in detail. In 1974, the U.S. Congress established the National Institute on Aging, and to this day supports Alzheimer research. As the population ages, the chance of some type of cognitive decline increases. The most serious brain disorders are Alzheimer's and dementia, Parkinson's, and ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Some 30 years ago, when I was working for Pfizer, we had the first approved Alzheimer's drug, which seemed to hold promise. I was involved in setting up the first Alzheimer's Society in Warsaw, Poland. Unfortunately, the drug never fulfilled its promise. Several more effective drugs are now on the market to slow memory loss and extend longevity, but there's still no cure. Parkinson's was first discovered in 1817 by James Parkinson. Today, it is the second most common disease of the brain. The causes are considered to be primarily genetic, but there may be some chemical and environmental involvement. There are several drugs for treatment, including for a reduction in hand tremors, but also with Alzheimer's, there's still no means of prevention or cure. Other very serious brain disorders, including multiple sclerosis and epilepsy. It is estimated that worldwide, 1 in 6 people suffers from some sort of mental disorder. Depression is a major ailment of the brain worldwide. In the US alone, 7 million people over 65 are known to suffer from depression. Serotonin reuptake drugs taken widely only seem to help a minority of people who suffer from depression. A newer approach is through the use of certain hallucinatory drugs, for which several research organizations are currently conducting clinical trials. Sadly, we seem to be some way away from preventative measures for diseases of the brain, although big pharma and specialized biotech firms are now focusing more and more on solving the challenges of neuroscience. Now I'll talk a little bit of my own life experiences. I sometimes have to squeeze myself to ensure that I'm still alive. One reason is because I'm an optimist. Half of my family are by nature pessimists and the other are optimists. My trait was inherited from my mother, who, in spite of a great deal of personal suffering, retained her sunny personality. Her favorite songs were Tomorrow from the musical Annie, and a World War II song called You Are My Sunshine, My Only Sunshine. One piece of advice from her, which I still retain, is when you look in the mirror first thing in the morning, smile and say, it'll be a good day. Another piece of good advice from my father was try not to retire. Work will help to retard aging. He worked full-time into his 80s and still had an active life into his 90s. I personally was employed until the age of 82. I tell some of my friends who retired in their mid-50s that I would still work if someone offered me a job. That's one reason why I gladly accepted the invitation to participate in this important meeting. I will also admit to a certain amount of vanity. I believe that a little vanity can help keep one's spirits up. I remember my mother having to wear corsets as she aged. They must have been most uncomfortable. Now women prefer to wear age-appropriate clothing. While nature has tended to make ladies' rear ends expand after a certain age, the opposite seems to happen to men. They lose their butt fat and they appear bony back there. Some men continue to wear the same trousers they used in middle age. so they sag unattractively. With a bit of pride, they could have them taken in or buy more age-appropriate slacks. I am still amazed and don't quite understand old men who insist on wearing shorts in the winter, displaying their bony legs. In order to try to retain their youthful appearance, some people like to have their hair colored. And have facelifts and use Botox. It can help delay the inevitable, but sometimes one sees disastrous effects on ladies in places like the Upper East Side of Manhattan or in the West End of London. Tattoos are another matter. While fashionable among young, they can sag unattractively with age. With some degree of pain, they can be removed. With aging comes the graying, whitening, and loss of hair. Coloring of hair can be certainly attractive if done age appropriately, but a wrinkled older person can be more appealing without ginger, dark brown, or black hair. The loss of hair can be traumatic for a woman, but a well-fashioned wig can certainly help. For men, it's easier to live without hair, and it can be attractive. I happen to be a little vain, so I use a hair restorative to slow down the inevitable. Vanity can be a good thing for older people. It can help their self-esteem. Well-groomed beards can be quite distinguished, but men who can't be bothered to shave or let their beards grow untrammeled can look like tramps or hobos. I recall the famous composer Stephen Sondheim, who was good-looking in his youth, but was completely disheveled in middle and old age. Of course, one's physical appearance is only superficial. How about the brain? Well, an active mind, that's important. We know that keeping one's mind active also helps the mens sana in corpore sano. I'm very supportive of the concept of lifelong learning. I continue to enjoy learning new things. Like a number of my contemporaries, I like to do crosswords, spelling bees, and puzzles, plus Scrabble on my iPad. I keep mentally challenged by playing the piano every day, preparing for a Zoom piano lesson. Reading a piano score is really quite complicated, transferring that to the fingers. I read a daily newspaper, but selective. I do not watch the news on TV or on the internet. As I tell my friends, aging is challenging enough. Why get depressed on top of it? We watch TV in the evenings, usually a nature program or something amusing. We avoid violence, which is all too common. I read 2 weekly magazines and a book every month or so. Recently, I've been going through the writings of Nobel Prize-winning authors. I also like to write, other than emails. In addition to a memoir, I've written a variety of pieces for my grandchildren. I've also written half of a novel so far based on genetics with a working title of 500 Years of a Family. How about diet and exercise? Much is written about the importance of diet and exercise. I will add a little about my own experience. When I was a boy during World War II and post-war Britain, food was rationed in Britain. Thanks to the U.S. Land Lease program, we had powdered eggs, which could be scrambled with water, or powdered milk, which also came from the U.S. In the winter, we ate mainly root vegetables and scraps of meat. I remember feeling hungry and walking a mile to the pharmacy to stave off my hunger. Once a month, my father would bring home a chicken as a treat. He bartered for the chicken, although bartering was actually illegal. The food scarcity didn't actually do us any harm. He taught us to appreciate food, but not to overindulge. We didn't know the word obesity when I was young. I will add a slightly yucky subject, if you don't mind, and that is constipation. When I was a boy, my parents made sure that I was regular. And boy, did they do that. If they suspected that that was not the case, they would give me an enema. I recall being chased around the house, being pinned down by my father, having the dreaded tube pushed in by my mother, and feeling the cold water slushing around in my tummy. For older people, constipation is not unusual. There are many drugs today for this condition, but I recommend simply inserting a suppository. I attended a very tough prep school in England daily. Every morning before prayers and breakfast, we were forced to have a cold bath. From May the 1st on, we had to run about 200 meters with just a towel over our shoulders to the swimming pool. We were all required to swim a length. On a couple of occasions, we had to first break an ice layer. As far as I remember, no boy ever caught pneumonia. Sports were obligatory, and I enjoyed them all except for boxing. Every term, we had a 5-mile run on the Yorkshire moors. One year I was lagging in the back. The teacher accused me of being lazy. In those days, one didn't make a fuss, a stiff British upper lip. If one had a cut or a bruise, we were told to ignore it. However, it was found after that run that I had a cyst behind my leg, which required an operation. Now, as an older person, I do not ignore the many aches and pains. I'm fortunate to have ready access to good health care thanks to the wonderful U.S. Medicare program. I enjoyed sports when I was younger, but I gave up skiing at 81 and recently stopped playing competitive lawn croquet. 15 years ago, I used to go to a gym, and there I met a great physical trainer. I live far from him now, but we continue our twice-weekly workouts over Zoom. I also use a treadmill in my garage. Walking remains an important activity, but before going on hikes, I try to remember to do some important stretching exercise. I have to climb our stairs several times a day, which is a good exercise. However, I tread very carefully. Too many of my older friends have become incapacitated through falling. As for diet, I try to eat modestly and healthy. For breakfast, I have a banana and a cereal with my own homemade yogurt and berries. Mid-morning, I have a coffee and a cookie or two. Lunch consists of half an avocado, heart of palm, and tzatziki, and a mixed salad with some protein left over from the previous evening's dinner. For dessert, I enjoy a couple of Saharan dates. Mid-afternoon, I usually have some fresh fruit. My next meal is at 7 p.m. My wife cooks a healthy one-course meal 6 evenings a week, and we may or may not have a glass of wine. One evening a week, we go to one of our many local restaurants. I try to avoid salt, but that is impossible when one eats out. And now I'd like to just add a few words on life expectancy. Earlier, I marveled at the increase in life expectancy, 25 years on an average since my birth. I should add that the fastest growing demographic in advanced economies is the over 100 age group. But sadly, there's been a reversal in average life expectancy, at least in the US and many other countries. In the US, the current average life expectancy is down to 79 for women and only 73 for men. This has been attributed by some to the lack of universal health care, as well as income and racial inequality. Life expectancy in the UK is down to 80 years, in Australia it's 84, and in Japan it's still 85. Sad to report that in much of Africa and also in Afghanistan, the life expectancy is still just over 50. The coronavirus has been the most commonly cited explanation, but we can blame other more longer-term factors like the opioid crisis, smoking, and alcoholism. The major one by far, however, is obesity, which has come with higher living standards worldwide. Ultra-processed and fast snack foods, which are heavily advertised, can take much of the blame. Some 30% of the world's population is now obese, with the most numbers being in the US, followed by China, India, Russia, and Brazil. In percentage terms, 36% of the US population is considered obese, while in the UK it is already 28%. Already 50 years ago, a half of Americans were overweight. Now it is almost 3/4. This is in inverse relationship to the tremendous advances in medical science and technologies and living standards. It seems to me that with prosperity and lifestyle changes, people cannot resist overindulging. One must, of course, sympathize with people who are born with a condition like congenital leptin deficiency, which makes them overweight. There are now drugs like Ozempic, Mounjaro, and Wegovy available to help people to control their cravings and lose weight. They are derivatives of drugs originally developed to combat diabetes. These drugs will have to be used permanently to keep weight down, and they are still expensive. As with all drugs, there will be complications and side effects. Now let's talk finally about a demographic crisis. In the late 18th century, Thomas Malthus projected the world would soon run out of food, and this would result in a population crisis. This has not happened. In fact, since the Green Revolution, food production continues to increase. If we now accept that overeating is a demographic crisis, it is time for some serious lobbying like that against tobacco use, which was to an extent effective. Food and beverage companies, as well as fast food retailers, need to be held accountable for encouraging people to overeat and oversnack. Food and beverage advertising should be restricted like tobacco advertising has been. I know that this is wishful thinking, but maybe the reversal in life expectancy will gradually have an influence. We can learn much also from the people in pockets of the world which have the most centenarians, like Okinawa, Sardinia, Nicoya in Greece, and parts of Costa Rica and Ecuador. These people typically are physically active, socially connected, and eat a diet of largely plant-based foods. In many other parts of the world, people have conditions and diseases associated with what they eat, such as high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and high cholesterol. In the US, it is estimated that 70% of our calories come from processed foods containing thousands of artificial food additives, many of which are known to cause cancer. While on the subject of nutrition, we should remember that around the world there are still millions of people, young and old, who are undernourished with retarded physical and mental growth. The food that is thrown away in our so-called developed world would be enough to feed all of the hungry and less fortunate. I will conclude on a more optimistic note. There is no magic solution for longevity. To an extent, it is a matter of genetic luck. Continued development of new drugs, vaccines, and medical devices will certainly extend life expectancy. People can improve their chances of a longer life through self-control. We know that moderation in alcohol consumption can help. It is a challenge for young people and college-age ones not to overindulge. Also, hallucinatory drugs have been a major temptation and scourge. Being overweight is certainly an important factor, but this requires much self-control with all of the temptations out there, including the desire for salt and sugar. It has also become socially unacceptable to be critical of overweight people, but certainly governments and NGOs can do much to reverse the trends. Finally, I hope that this conference and others like it can contribute further towards more people leading healthier, happier, and longer lives. Thank you for your attention.